Podcast. I'm your host, Thaddeus Campbell. Really excited today. Somebody that I got to know a couple years ago at an event that I was at, and his story just, man, it brought me to tears. Very excited. Been wanting to get him on the podcast for a long time. Tried a couple times, never worked out timing wise, but really excited today to have Damon Nichols on the show. Damon, so excited to share your story with my audience. Thanks for joining us.
All right, man. Thanks. Yeah, I've been looking forward to it. Ever since we met, we made a great connection, and I've been following you on your journey. And we stay connected through social media. But I've been wanting to connect with you for quite a while. We've got similar backgrounds, and we're in the same industry, so we've got a lot in common. And we both, have to overcome a lot. So it's great to be able to actually get here and talk.
Love it. I always start the podcast with the same thing. You mentioned that we're in this self-storage industry. You obviously were a builder, are a builder. That's how we ended up meeting. You came to a self-storage mastermind that we were doing at a old company I work with. Want to pick your brain about this. Is such a unique industry. It's such a niche industry. Always love to hear the story of how people got into self-storage.
So I had no intention of getting into self-storage. I was doing house flips at the time. I was in the middle. I was on my first fix and flip in my hometown, and my truck broke down. I went to a guy that I used to work for, and he sold me this old truck, a work truck, and he told me his cousin needed some storage built and asked me if I was interested in doing it. So I told him, yeah, but I didn't realize, what I was getting into. And he said, give me a price. And there was nothing. I don't even know if they had the concrete poured yet. And I just was like, well, I just figured, well, I think I could do this in this much time. And I shot him a price, and then I forgot. And like a month later, he shows up with the blueprints and was like, hey, the buildings are going to be here in a couple of days. And I was like, I don't know if I want to do it. And he was like, yeah, I'm counting on you. So I did it. And it was 4 buildings. It was a pretty good sized project. It was, 30,000 square feet. And it was me and one other guy, and I picked up 1-2 guys while I was working there. But everybody that was driving by, it was right on the side of the highway. People were coming up to me asking if I, could build storage. It's like, well, no, this is not what I do. And they just kept on me. When I was done, I had more people. The concrete crew that poured the concrete referred me. And so I decided to, take another one on, and it grew from there. And then I realized that I could go out of state, because I had people out of state that had buildings setting, and they couldn't find crews to do it. So I put together a crew, and we were able to travel. And since then, that was in 2018. And so since then, we've probably built, 200 or 300 buildings all across the United States. And I think we've been in about 17 or 18 different states. So, it's turned out to be a pretty profitable business. And finding out that I can take a crew of guys, I have like 9 or 10 guys, and we can go knock out 50,000 square feet in 2 or 3 weeks. And we're there. We set up shop, we put the buildings together, and we're out, and people are renting doors when we leave.
That's awesome. Tell me about this industry. I find it fascinating. And it's, obviously you came, and we'll get into your background, because your background is mind blowing. And I want to spend a good chunk of our 30 minutes talking about that. But self-storage is, for me personally, just such a different industry. What's your experience been like with the owners that you're building for?
So I've had great experience, man. I haven't had any, I've had issues with one or two people, but it was for, different reasons. But every one of the owners has been great. Yeah, they're just amazed at how fast we can come in and put them up. But I have so many clients that they put up a building one year and it filled up, and then they call me back for the next year and the next year. So I have 3 or 4 time repeat clients, and these clients are just like, wow, this is the best thing I've ever got into. I just did it, finished it. Well, I'm almost finished with a job down in Texas. And the guy who referred these people, he had a ten building storage facility. This lady just built a 10 building storage facility, and now they're looking for more. They're like, this is crazy. So, yeah, it's a kind of a game changer. A lot of people are moving into that, and there's a lot that goes with it. I'm sure you know, and how to be able to borrow the money up front for private money, build a facility, put it together, get people in it, and then go to the bank and cash out and walk away with a lot of money in your pocket.
Yeah, it's definitely been an industry that has, it's made a lot of wealth for a lot of people,
Yeah,
especially those that got into. You mentioned 2018 when you first started doing it. Obviously interest rates have changed now. It's getting a little more challenging than it was back in the heyday. But that being said, still an amazing industry, which is why you've been in demand that whole time. As you said, you
hmm
open up a space, it leases up, they want to open another one. I'm going to
yeah,
pivot a little bit now because I would be remiss in not sharing your story a little bit. We're going to go back to 2018, but then we're going to go back even longer because where Damon Nichols is as a human being in 2024 is a far cry from some earlier version of Damon Nichols. We're going to talk about your book because you've written a book about this. But I want you to take me back to your struggles. You've been very open about your struggles with addiction, with alcohol and with drugs. And tell me about that and kind of counterpose it to where you're at in your life now and how that journey happened.
yeah. So for most of my life, I spent a lot of my life in and out of prisons and treatment centers and addicted to drugs. And um, I grew up in a poor area on a farm, and at 5 years old, my mom left, and so I grew up, and it was just me and my brother and my dad on a sheep farm, and we were raising sheep. But my mom took us, and for 9 months my dad tracked us down and he took us back, and then I didn't it was a really messy deal there, and that sparked a lot of resentment for me at a young age, and then having to take on this role of as an older brother, but almost as a parent to my younger brother, and having all of that responsibility of raising animals and taking care of a farm, which now I know has been the best thing that ever happened to me. But at the time, it was it was hard to deal with. And then I started getting into trouble. I got into drugs, and from there it was just uh, I was off and running. And then when I finally went to go see my mom after like 7 years of being away from her, she was doing her own thing. Then it just my life got really out of control. I got into heavy drugs. I got into cocaine, methamphetamine, acid, and that was in the early '80s, and that stuff was big. And then I just went down these roads, and I ended up in a treatment center by the time I was 18 years old, and then I got out, and I would get clean long enough to just do it again. And 20 years old, 20 when I turned 21. 9 days after I turned 21, I got a 6 year prison sentence. So I went to prison in Colorado. I got out. I did well again for a while. I tried to start a business, but then when my business failed, I, went down the same road. I got into, meth. I got into cooking meth, and then my life really spiraled out of control. Um, then, I met this woman right after I got out of prison. We had two kids, and that had that business, but then I ended up getting in a car accident, and she got killed, and then I was left to raise two boys by myself, and so dealing with that was so rough. That yeah, I went into like probably one of the darkest places I've ever been, or any human being could be. But through that, I ended up getting more time, halfway house time. I couldn't finish that. I went through another treatment center. I met who is now my wife, Celeste, in that treatment center. But our lives were a wreck. I tried to, you know, get out. My brother had my boys for the few years while I was gone. I got my boys back. I was trying to raise them, trying to start a relationship with her. I was clean for a while, working a regular $25 an hour job, and then I got back into it again. The job, the company went under, and I went back to doing what I knew was easy, and that was dealing drugs. And then I found myself, in such a bad place. In 2014, I got arrested. I picked up a bunch more felonies, and that was the end for me. That was um, where I had to completely changed my life. So in 2014 was where it all came crashing down. I ended up with I had 8 felonies at that point, and I decided to turn my life around. So that was the point where I had had enough. I was 45 years old and it was done. So uh, from there, from the last 10 years, my life has gone from that to where I'm at now. So we can get into what I did to,
I'd love
get
to
to where
hear
I'm.
because this is listen, you're talking 35 years
Yeah.
of a pattern. And so
Hmm.
I'm always amazed because we talk about how people don't change after a certain point, but you're 45 years old. How does Damon Nichols make and look, you've had reasons to change before. You freely
Yeah.
admit you
Oh,
had
yeah.
two boys. That wasn't what was it that finally sparked the ability to say, you know what, it's time to get on the right path?
It was the need for change. I finally had got to the point where I had hated myself more, even though like I had gone through that accident and I blamed myself. That just kept building and building and building. I had learned a lot of tools over the last, being in and out of institutions. You're required to take courses and classes and go through all this stuff, but you learn all this stuff, but it just goes, you can learn and learn and learn and learn, and you're just overloaded with information. But when you finally decide I gotta take action in my life, and I also had realized that I'd put myself, I was a victim in everything I'd done all the way, and I'd
Oh,
looked at
I love
myself
it.
as a victim. And when I had to get around the right people because I'd never been around the right people. I've always flocked toward negative type of people or people that were in addiction and stuff. But when I finally looked for somebody and realized I want to change, the right people came into my life. And at that point, it happened to be a pastor that said things to me that nobody had ever said, nobody had ever done, or maybe they did. I just, it took somebody from outside to say something to me that meant something and showed me that there was genuine people out there that cared, and somebody that cared without a motive. Um, but then it became choice. I had I had to make some really really tough choices, and that's where it comes down to. I talk about um, mustard sliders. that's like that's a choice that I had to take. I'll tell you the story here. I was it was in the middle of winter. I was facing all these charges. I was having to go to court. I couldn't go very far from. I was staying in Golden, Colorado. I had a lot of court appearances there. I got visits with my son. Fortunately, he was staying with family, so I could see him a couple times a week. Well, it was below zero. I had like $10 in my truck. I could only put gas in my truck, and I used like I think $1.50 that night. I had a choice to either go somewhere where it was warm, where I knew that I could go eat, but I also knew that that was dangerous because there was drugs going on in that environment. But to physically have to say no, I'm going to put $8 of gas in my truck and go in to King Supers and find what I could buy for $2. And I bought slider bread, and I got condiments from the free condiments. It was
Uh,
mustard and honey, and like I lived off that for 4 or 5 days. That's because that's all I had. And I would start my truck long enough that I could warm up in there. I had a bunch of blankets, and I mean it was really really cold. We're kind of in the foothills in the mountains. For a
yep.
week there, it was below zero, and that's where I stayed in my truck, and I lived off of that, and I ran my truck for a little while at a time to stay warm. But I just remember that whole week of that choice. Like I could go here or tough it through, and I made it through. So that was a defining moment in my life.
I love hearing stories like that. On anybody who's listening who puts on any type of events or hosts, with their company or whatever. I'm going to tell you, Damon and I first met in New Orleans. It was right before the SSA show in March of 2023, I think, might have been 22. We met there. It was 23, And you spoke on stage, and as I said earlier, man, you shared this story, and it brought me to tears. I'm not gonna lie. I had spoken at that event before you, and I had talked about personal responsibility, which is so interesting, that it ties in, and maybe one of the
Yeah.
reasons we made such a personal connection. I try very hard, and it's not easy, and this. And you said it. It's a constant choice, right? Of choosing to take responsibility instead of choosing to be the victim.
Right.
What I wanted to ask is, 10 years in, how frequently do you still have to make those type of choices, like the night in Golden, Colorado, where hey, this is appealing, but I know if I go there, it might be might put me on the wrong path again. How frequently does that come up in your life still?
Oh, so like that's not even a question anymore. Like I'm on this trajectory now. I have gotten into some high profile groups. I've surrounded myself with people that are doing big things in their lives, and I've got into just these really high accountability groups. And I was in Vegas last week, and I flew in early in the morning, and I had to walk around in the casinos. I spent most of the day just walking around there, and I look around, and I'm like, that is it's just so horrible. I'm watching everybody just feed their addictions in every way, and I'm like, man, I would never. It's sickening to me to watch that, and I see things. We go out to restaurants or stuff. I see people sitting at the bar. I see people, and I deal with people that are still dealing with meth addiction and stuff. And I'm like, man, it's just so. It's so there's no chance that I would ever like. No, I'm on a different plane now and a different path, and it's just every day I wake up and I'm so grateful for what I have, and so thankful to be where I'm at, and just by the grace of God, I have a wonderful life. And it doesn't matter if my bank account's got a lot of money in it or it doesn't have any money in it at all. I'm still so glad to be alive, and I love what I do, and I'm living life, and I wouldn't want it any other way.
So I was going to ask that. You talked about your bank account. It kind of leads me into a question I wanted to ask anyway. You had talked earlier in your journey a couple of points where one, you tried to start a business and it went out of business, and then you were working for another company and they went out of business, and both of those things kind of put you into the backslide again. Yet in 2018, here you are flipping houses, right? You're embarking on this entrepreneurial journey. How much how much did you question yourself about that at that time? About, hey, is Damon Nichols gonna work for himself? Because there's a lot of risk there.
Yeah. Well, so after all of that, once the dust started settling there, I had a I had I didn't have a place to live, so I actually found an office building for $200 a month. That was finally the first place that I could actually go and sleep after months of sleeping in my truck. That I had some warmth, put an air bed in there, and I felt like a king. Like I had a warm place to stay. I didn't have a shower, but I was next to a TA, so I could shower there. And
Nice.
and I got this little cook stove thing, so I I could eat there. But then I started doing some looking on Craigslist. I started looking for stuff, and I ended up going to work for an electrical contractor, and I worked for them for a while. But it was a long ways away. And then I had an opportunity to go take this really good position for like it was like $45 an hour job, which at that time it was electrical a PLC engineer programmer, and I was like, yeah, this is great. The day I was supposed to go to work there, they told me, well, we can't hire you because you're felon.
Uh,
And I was also on the side. I was delivering pizzas for Domino's,
yeah.
so I was trying to do what I could, and at that point, that was all I had. I'm like, okay, so I gotta do this. So I delivered. I hustled, and I decided, you know what, I want to get into real estate. I didn't know the first thing about real estate. I went to one of those seminars. I had people tell me, oh, it's a scam. You're gonna lose your money, and I wrote a check to go to the next. It was an upsell. So I wrote a check to go. And I had people telling me that you're just wasting your money. Even my wife questioned. She was like, you wrote a check. We barely have that money to clear the bank. And
Yeah.
so I ended up going, but I went with the intent that I'm going to learn, and it was the best decision I ever made. And I learned so much there that I'm like, okay, I can do this. So I I hung around Denver, and I started putting the pieces together. I started realizing that I gotta shed off everything about myself, even though I was still facing felonies. I can't bring any of that criminal. I can't bring any of that talk. I can't bring any of that into this life because these people don't deal like that. Don't do business like that. I got to be the guy that they want to do business with. So that means I got to talk different. I got to communicate different, and I gotta uh, engage with people different. So through that, I started doing a lot of volunteer work at the soup kitchen. That was such a game changer for me. It made me treat people different. It made me look at people different, and I had to just learn a whole different skill set. And most of it was communication and how to network with people and how to be the guy that people want to do business with. So things started working. I started helping people, doing some stuff around town. Then I found people with money. I realized that there's a whole group of people out here that have money. They want to invest, and just how to now put that skill set together and find the investment, and then the people will have, the money will come. So it was a huge mindset shift for me. And
I
then
think
yeah,
Yeah, I was just going to say it's fascinating because my journey, I wasn't the drugs and the alcohol wasn't my crutch. It was sugar. It was Pepsi. We've talked about this, which is
yeah,
it's similarly as addictive. But I got into real estate the same exact way, which resonates with me a ton because so many people go to a event like that, and you said it, the negativity, right? They'll have that mindset of like they're just trying to take your money. You and I are wired the same way. I'm like, wait, I can do that, right? And look
yeah,
where that leads, and where we're at now working on multi-million-dollar projects. And if we hadn't had that mindset going, and if we listened to the negativity, you don't go down the road, and it's not the greatest thing in your life. And like you, similarly, I absolutely love what I do every day. So how
yeah.
thankful to be alive and be doing something that gives you joy, which is cool. I didn't mean to interrupt. I'm
No, no, that's
interested.
yeah,
I'm interested on how challenging was it for you, letting go of the background because you're talking to people about, if you're flipping houses, it can be tens, hundreds of thousands of dollars that you're borrowing from people. That's a big ask. And
yeah.
how challenging was that for you from a mindset standpoint to be able to go and ask for that money?
Yeah. So I had to overcome that belief system and realize that I can do this. I know how to I know how to do this, and I can put the projects together. I know, a couple of things I wasn't sure about when I first started out was all of the technical stuff of how to, do things. But one I took one deal, and it was, we went out and we looked for properties. We went and drove around. We found a house, and I knew I had people that had money. I found a house. The guy was like, "All right, I have three people that are interested in this property, and I live out here," which was in Monument. And so at 6 o'clock in the morning, I'm up. The first person that comes to my house is going to get this deal. And this was in Colorado Springs. Uh, we lived in I think we had just moved back to La Junta at the time. I was still working in Denver,
Yeah.
living in my truck, staying in my truck, or staying in these rehab houses that I was working on for this lady. I was one particular lady. So I spent the night in my truck in a McDonald's parking lot in Monument in a snowstorm, so that I could be the first person at this guy's house at 6 o'clock in the morning. And I was there. I was there like a few minutes early and knocked on his door. We wrote a contract. I didn't know what I was doing, but I'm like, I'm going to do this. I wrote a contract and we signed the contract. And thing is, he wanted a $2,000 earnest money check, and that was the thing. I didn't have $2,000, but I wrote him the check, and this was a
Yep.
Sunday. So I wrote him the check, and then, but I had a friend that I had done some rehab work for who trusted me and knew that I do this. I'm like, hey, I'm getting into this. I went right to him. I was like, hey, I need to borrow $2,000. I got this deal, and he now is my business partner.
Oh,
So
I love it.
he loaned me the $2,000, and I was at the bank when they opened at 9 o'clock in the morning and made sure I put the tooth. I didn't realize all of what went into it. I didn't know, they held the check in escrow for a while, but I wanted to make sure that the money was there before the
Yeah.
bank opened so I didn't bounce a check. So, I mean, even though I took a risk, I was willing to make sure that I I covered that.
So
So just
interesting.
taking those steps like that and knowing that I can do this.
Yeah.
Um, I the stuff that I knew that I could control, I went 100% at. If I
Yeah.
knew that I could make it, like I knew that I had somebody out there that could help me with a check. So I wrote the check, and I knew that if I had to do a lot and go a lot out of my way to make sure that I had that money in there in the morning. So like just little things like that. Like that's what I knew I could control. So I'm going to push it and do what I got to do. So yeah, so that was the start. But we partnered up on one of my first projects, and just you know taking control of what I knew I could do, and doing it to the max, and 100 going 100% at what I had control of, and knowing that there's things out of my control, because as I went through, and like I did probably 50 rehab projects over that time while I was building storage and stuff, and I bought a restaurant, and I did a lot of these different things at the time. And I don't know how, I think more, probably 90% of the times the closing didn't go as it was supposed to. Things didn't happen the way, nothing ever happens the way it's supposed to. We have dates, they always get pushed back. It's just
Yeah.
nothing ever happens. And you got to know that that's out of your control. And what can I do to get around that or think outside the box? So I've always been real creative. So I've
I'm
found ways.
interested real quick, and we're coming up on this 30 minutes that I try and
Okay.
adhere to for your, to honor your time, but also for the listeners so they can absorb. You talked about growing up on a farm. That my
Yeah.
dad grew up on a 40-acre potato farm with cows and chickens, and seven brothers and sisters. All five boys ended up being entrepreneurs. All of them owned their own business at one point or another in their life. And I'm interested to know how much you attribute growing up on a farm to this kind of serial entrepreneurship and success that you've been able to create.
100%. If I wouldn't have had the father that I had, I'm so thankful for my father that pushed me to be the best person that I could, even though it was tough. He didn't, you know, he- I would go, I wanted to make money, so he was like, I can loan you money to buy a chainsaw so you can go cut wood and go make money. And that was one of the things that I did. You can go shear sheep, and I'll give you some money for the wool. So, I did that. Or you could, so I had to work for everything I did. He didn't give me anything. And I'm so thankful that he didn't give me anything. We didn't have anything. We didn't have very much. We were super poor, but I didn't know. Like I didn't realize that was the lifestyle, but I just knew I had to work real hard, and everything I had, I valued because I worked for it. But if I wouldn't have grown up there, it would be different.
So, listen, I want to tell the people watching Breakout Blueprint is Damon Nichols' book. We'll have a scroll down here to the link to Amazon so you guys can grab that. It goes through this story and the steps that he took, and kind of gives, you've mentioned this before in conversations about how you were inspired to share this story of what you had to go through, and hopefully give people the blueprint to be able to make changes in their own life. I'm so inspired talking to you, man. I can't thank you enough. What I want to know is, if people want to get in touch with you about building storage for them, what's the best way to get a hold of Damon Nichols?
So they could hit me up on Instagram, Damon R Nichols at Instagram, or Facebook. I have Damon Nichols Facebook, but I have a website. It's Damon Nichols at or just damonnichols.com. Yeah, it's damonnichols.com. So those are the pretty easiest ways to get a hold of me. I have a LinkedIn. I'm not real on that that much. I mean, I have some YouTube stuff on there. I have some shorts. I have some little pieces of building storage. But we're also filming a series called Built to Store. So we've been filming our projects. We have a film
Love it.
crew that's doing that. So we're going to be hopefully having a whole season of building storage coming up in
I love
2025.
it. If you try and get a hold of Damon and don't succeed, reach out to me because I'll get a hold of him quick. I know how to
Yep.
get a hold of him. But
And
really looking forward to,
yep.
seeing it, how people respond. But as I said, man, I couldn't help but be excited to have you come on because your story, it's just inspiring to think that somebody could be 45 years old and just do a complete U-turn in their life and accomplish what you've accomplished. if you're not inspired by that, I don't know what inspires somebody. Thanks so much for sharing the story.
All right. Well, thanks for having me on here. And, I look forward to, hanging out, doing
We got
business
to
or
get back
whatever.
together in an
Yeah.
event here soon. We'll definitely
Yeah.
make that happen. Listen, that's it for this episode of Self Storage Made Simple. Thanks as always to the guys at PropRise, www.proprise.io. Check out their website. They are outpacing the self storage industry with supercharged deal sourcing. I use their site every day, swear by it. It's great software. So check out those guys. You could set up a demo with them. And thanks as always for their support. We will see you guys next week.